Dr. Robert Wicks is Professor and Director of Program Development for the Graduate Programs in Pastoral Counseling at Loyola College in Maryland. In his clinical practice, Dr. Wicks focuses on working with persons in full-time ministry. A frequent lecturer around the world, he has published over 30 books on psychology and spirituality.
I'm happy to be with you. Let me begin with a story. A little over a year ago, I had an unusual surprise. I really enjoy writing, and it usually takes me quite a bit of time to produce a book. I spend about a year thinking about it, and then over a year writing it, and it's relatively short when I'm done, and then I give it to my wife to edit, and then it's shorter when I get it back. And when I finish it and I look at the few pages, I'm very proud of it. Well, my last book, Touching the Holy, which deals with ordinariness, self-esteem, and friendship, when I finished that book, rather than feeling proud of it, I felt grateful. Grateful that God allowed me to be with the material that was in it. And that's the material I'd like to share with you. It's material that centers around several words. The words perspective, the word passion, the word ordinariness, friendship, and reflection or prayer. Let me speak to you first about perspective. Now, perspective is fascinating because it's not only is it a good psychological word, but it has great scriptural and spiritual roots. For example, in the Talmud, we read, "You do not see things as they are. You see things as you are." In Matthew 6:22, we read, "If your eye is good, your whole body will be good." But perspective isn't easy. I myself thought I should be able to maintain perspective without any problem. It should be easy. My work integrates psychology and spirituality. Most of my patients are priests or ministers or sisters or brothers, physicians, nurses, or therapists. I lecture on burnout. I teach on stress. Should be able to keep perspective, but I noticed I was continually losing perspective, and I thought, well, there must be something wrong with me. And finally, I heard a neurologist on the West Coast speak, and he said he had the same problem, and finally his daughter had to teach him that you have to really be self-aware every day, otherwise you lose perspective. The story he told was about his daughter. He said he thought he should be able to keep perspective until he did something very dramatic in his life. He sent his first daughter away to college. And when he got her first set of grades, he said instantly he lost perspective. He said he had visions of her failing out and taking his money with her. But instead, what happened was he received this letter. The first semester, she just about made it. In the second semester, he says he opened up the mail, and there was a letter from her, and it said, "Dear Dad, stop worrying about me. I've never been as happy as I am at this moment in life. You would love Ichabod. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and our first 3 months of marriage have been most blissful." He said, "More good news, Dad. The drug rehab program that we're both in has told us that the baby that's due in February will not be addicted at birth." With fear and trepidation, he turned over the page, and on the other side it said, "Dad, there is no Ichabod. I'm not pregnant, and I haven't abused drugs. But I did get a D in chemistry, so keep things in perspective." I think Anthony DeMello echoes this theme quite sublimely in his book, 1 Minute Wisdom. In that book, there's a dialogue, a series of dialogues between a master and a disciple. And one of the dialogues goes like this: "To a disciple who was forever complaining about others, the master said this. He said, 'Seek not to change others, but seek to change yourself instead.'" And then the master gave the disciple an image. And if you take this image with you, I think it'll be worth the whole trip today to hear this. He said, remember, it is easier to put on slippers than to carpet the whole of the earth. I think what happens in religious life, in our desire to reach out to others, we forget God, we forget grace, and we get into the carpeting business. Perspective comes when we have an attitude within us that makes a difference. The great psychiatrist Carl Jung offered us good advice with respect to taking responsibility for our life. He said that in the second half of our life, once we're moving toward that adult mode in our life, one of the greatest tasks is to withdraw our projections, to take responsibility for our lives. But to do that, I really think that we have to see what are the real enemies of psychological and spiritual perspective. I think probably the first and main enemy of perspective is anxiety due to an inordinate fear of failure. I think that failure can awaken us to life in a much more dramatic way than success ever could. As a matter of fact, I think we have to get used to failure. This group in this room today should fail more than any other group in the world. The more you're involved, the more you fail. I think people watching the show, the same thing. If they care, they're going to fail a lot. So if you want to really live a full spiritual and psychological life, you have to get used to failure. I think many of us are very frightened of failure. But to remain committed, we also have to realize the place of failure in our life. Rabbi Tarfon, who was a contemporary of Jesus, said, "The day is short, the work is great, the laborers are sluggish, the wages are high, and the master of the house is insistent. It is not your duty to finish the work, but you are not free to neglect it." Alan Bisak of South Africa echoed this theme. He said that when we die, we will go before God, and God will meet us, and he will ask us, "Where are your wounds?" And if we're honest, we will say, "We have no wounds, Lord." And God will say to us, "Was there nothing worth fighting for?" Now, having said this, some of you may say, "Well, I don't have to worry about that. If God asks me, where are your wounds? I have plenty of wounds to show God." But my question, my challenge to you today is, are they real wounds or are they neurotic wounds? Let me give you an illustration from my own life. I'm not somebody who likes cutesy things. It's just a thing with me. And maybe it's being born and raised in New York City. But I was standing there looking out the window once and thinking to myself, I'm going to put a gravestone in my yard. And on the gravestone is going to be carved, "Here lies the Myers-Briggs test." Now, some of you may be familiar with it. The Myers-Briggs test is a little test based on Jungian wisdom. And I thought to myself, it had been 2 full weeks since somebody asked me my letters. And just then, somebody walked up to me and said to me, "What is your number?" And I said, "You mean my letters, the Myers-Briggs?" They said, "Oh, no, your number, the Enneagram. It's a new test that's just come out." I thought, "Oh, it saved me from this." And she said to me, "I think I've got your number." And I said, "Why do I feel that you've got my number?" She said, "You are a number 3 on the Enneagram." And I asked the typical 3 question. I said, "Is that good or bad?" And she handed me this book called The Enneagram in Prayer. And she turned to the back of the book, and it shows your compulsions and sins and your gifts. And I started reading this thing, and I thought, my mother wrote this. It was so accurate that it was uncanny. The 3 is a pompous rear end, true. The 3 is frightened of failure, and on and on. I said, I'm depressed. She said, "Well, read about your gifts." I said, "Well, I'm too depressed at this point." Well, imagine a person like me, a number 3 on the Enneagram, gets invited to speak to a group with terrible morale. Now, I'm not very famous, so when they heard I was coming, they didn't even know who I was, but as soon as they heard I was coming, they began to hate me. So when I went there, I knew that, and I gave it my best shot, and they managed to keep that level of hate up here. When I went home for lunch, I prayed number 3 prayers like, relieve me of this. I even moved into old laments like, smite them and their little children. I sensed Jesus saying, Bob, we don't do that anymore. But as I was praying, I sensed God responding to me, and you never know whether it's God or it's your own psychosis or what. But I sensed God saying to me, did you discern that you should be with these people? And I said, yes, Lord, I really think I belong. It's not going well, but I really believe that I'm supposed to be with them. And then I sensed God saying, well, then why this prayer? And I said, but this is painful. This is difficult. And then I don't know whether it happens to you or not, but it happens to me occasionally that sometime in my prayer life, what comes to the surface all of a sudden is a piece of Scripture. And what came to the surface really was that part of Scripture where Jesus says that they did terrible things to me and the prophets before me. They will do the same to you and worse. The problem with you, Bob, is that when you say religious things, most of the time people smile and they hug you. But when things get difficult, you want to run away. The reality is that failure can awaken us to the place of grace, the place that God plays in our life. Embarrassment and awkwardness are the salvific handles of God's grace. As the famous theologian Bultmann says, grace can never be possessed, but must be received again and again. This is the whole message of Mark 10, that whole passage where the camel through the eye of a needle. Do you remember that passage? Often when we hear homilies, we hear it on the rich and the poor, but if we go back to that passage and remember when it was written, we know that the interpretation then was very, very different. Because then it was feel that people who were wealthy were blessed. So if Jesus were here now and gave you that passage now, he would say to you, it is easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for you at your most dedicated and most humble to get into heaven. And after a difficult day, if you heard this, you would say, well, then who can be saved, Lord? And God would look back at you very directly and say, don't you get it? With the human person, it's not possible. But with God, all is possible. We must constantly remember what is in our hands and what is in God's hands. The second major enemy of perspective is a fear of doubt and change. The U.S. statesperson John Foster Dulles once said, if you are afraid to go to the brink, you are lost. I think the same can be said with respect to our faith. In one place in his writings, one theologian suggested we replace the word faith in the New Testament with the word trust. Given the substitution, I think that the amount of trust we have in God is sometimes best measured by the depth of the doubt and the seriousness of the questions with which we're willing to live. I know that depression, stress, and anxiety are often caused by physical things, by psychological, or even by social things. But the problem is, I think, one of the major causes that we don't recognize for depression, stress, and anxiety today is that it is caused by spiritual things. We confuse security and comfortability with peace. Let me tell you a story that may help. It's a story that's gone around for years, but it's worth telling again. There's a group of people in Africa who have this unique way of catching monkeys. Now, as you know, monkeys are very, very bright and they're frenetic. So that, in fact, if you're not careful, you can hurt them when you go to catch them, and then the zoos don't want to buy them. So what these people have decided is they found gourds that are shaped like this. And they cut out the large end of the gourd, and they empty the gourd, and they fill it full of peanuts. Then they close up the gourd, and they attach the gourd to a tree, and they cut out the small end, and then they leave. After several hours, when the monkeys hear that the birds have calmed down, they climb down the trees, and they look around and see what did this other animal do. And as they're looking around to see what this other animal did, they find the gourds. And they look in the gourds and they see the peanuts. And they smell inside the gourds and they smell the peanuts and they say, oh, I want that. And they reach in and they grab the peanuts, then they can't get their hand out. And all they need to do to get away is let go of the peanuts. But instead, what do? They hold on to the peanuts, screaming in fear and frustration all night until the next morning when the people come back, pick them up and carry them to zoos where they will be unhappy for the rest of their lives. Now, before you project too quickly on these poor animals, the question I have for you today is, what are you holding on to that's making you unhappy? Let me ask it in a different way. Who is your God? Now, you may say, oh, let me give you a theological formulation. No. Let's go Matthew 6, where it says, where your treasure is, your heart is. Let's go right down to good behavior to find out who your God is. If you, for example, if you say you love me and you drop a rock on my head, well, I have some doubts. Let's see who your God is. In Matthew 6, it says where your treasure is, your heart is. So let me explain. Who and what you think about first thing in the morning when you get up, that's your God. Who or what you think about when you go to bed, that's your God. What preoccupies you during the day, that's your God. Where your treasure is, your heart is. Now you may say to me, well, don't you think I should be concerned about people? About events? Yes. But you know and I know that there's a difference between concern and preoccupation. If you say you get up and you think about somebody and you worry and you say, what can I do about it? You plan what to do and then you let go, then that's very different from constantly having something eating at you, something that you worry about. That negative thing is your God. Now, what supports perspective is another important word, a word also that I touched on in the book Touching the Holy. And that word is passion. And by passion, I don't mean exhilaration, I don't mean exuberance, I mean the ability to be fully awake. To be fully awake. That's wonderful. To be awake means to see things differently. The famous Rabbi Abraham Heschel had a heart attack that he never fully recovered from. And he was visited by a longtime friend and colleague and fellow Rabbi Samuel Dresner. And Dresner tells the story that when he came in to visit Rabbi Heschel, Heschel said to him, sit down, Sam, there's something I want to tell you. When I came to after my heart attack, I felt no anger, I felt no sadness, I felt only gratitude for all of the things that I've seen in the world. And I said to myself at that particular point in time, it's amazing. And then he paused to catch his breath. And he said, you know what, Sam, maybe that's what I meant when I wrote in a preface to one of my books many years ago, that really, he says, when I wrote in the preface to that book, I never asked God for success. I only asked for wonder, and God gave it to me. Now, is that what we, in fact, can say about ourselves? In Luke 12:49, Jesus says, I've come to set the world afire, and how I wish it were blazing already. That blazing is that sense of awakeness, that sense of seeing the world through different eyes. That's passion. Brother David Stendhal Rast wrote a great book called Gratefulness. And in this book, Gratefulness, he said, at one point he said, he says, most of us leave the house each day with a list, and on that list is what we'll be grateful for. He said, throw away the list and be open to the possibility of being grateful for all kinds of things. But I think this takes the whole concept of unlearning if we're going to be able to do this. Anthony DeMello died a number of years ago at Fordham University. Before he died, he was on a lecture tour, and he loved to tell this story about unlearning. He said, at the heart of passion, at the heart of gratefulness is unlearning. And he told the story in this way. He said, a woman was walking down the street, and she saw this man, and all of a sudden she grabbed him at the last minute, and she said, Henry, I almost walked right by you. I haven't seen you in 5 years. I didn't even recognize you. I remember you as being so tall, and you're so short now. I remember you as having a pale complexion, and you're so swarthy. And she went on, and finally he got a word in edgewise, and he said, excuse me, my name's not Henry. And she said, oh, so you've changed your name too. The issue is passion really opens us up to the possibility of seeing things very, very differently. I think when we care, we run the risk of losing passion and perspective because we forget grace. We forget the place of God in our life. Urban Holmes, a famous Episcopal dean, wrote many years ago something that I've never forgotten. He said, let me see if I can get this correctly because it's a little tricky. He said, the opposite of detachment is not compassion. Let me say that again. The opposite of detachment is not compassion. It is seduction. Seduction. He said, we are seduced by the crazy expectations of others and our own crazy expectations. And he said, what we need to do is discern what are the expectations of God. We need to take out time constantly in silence and solitude and prayer and self-reflection and ask, what is God asking of us now? We need to be concrete now. We need to ask God through our self-reflection, through our chats with others, and through our own sense of prayer. Now, often we forget to take out time to do this. And my suggestion to you is that you take out 2 minutes a day for perspective, passion, and prayer. Now, as I say 2 minutes a day, you might say to me, you might say, oh, gee, I should really pray longer than that. Yes, you should. But if you don't lie to me, I won't lie to you. The reality is you often promise a half hour a day, an hour a day, and do you do it? Oh, well, I was busy. Well, 2 minutes, you can be late. 2 minutes, you can spare. If you wish to pray longer, that's fine. But each morning, in silence, solitude, and gratitude, grab your juice, grab your coffee, and sit there in silence before God, wrapped in gratitude before God, quietly before God. Some people say, well, in my house, you couldn't possibly do that. People are always after me. Well, I suggest 2 things. Stay in bed then, in silence and solitude. Some people say, well, if I stay in bed, I'll fall back to sleep. Well, then get up and find a corner of the house. Well, they'll find me in the corner of the house. Well, go into the bathroom then. Well, they'll find me in the bathroom. Well, then go in the shower. Whatever you need to do to get that little space for 2 minutes. If you do that over a period of even a month, you will notice the change. You will notice the depth. Now, what am I trying to say to you? Well, I think I can bring perspective and passion and prayer together by recalling a movie. I don't know if you remember the movie Amadeus. What a crazy movie, which naturally I liked it then. The movie was on Mozart, and I'll never forget it. I got it on video, and we put it in, it was just starting, and my daughter said, I said to my daughter, she and I were watching it, I said, oh, stop the video, stop the video. And she said, Dad, we just started the video. Let us continue. I said, stop the video at this point, quick. She said, Dad, 5 more milligrams of Haldol, this behavior will go away. I said, you just stop the video. And the scene is this. If you've seen the movie, the scene is with Signore Salieri is the court composer. And he has heard that Mozart has been invited to compose a piece and play it for the court. And he's furious, he's jealous and he's furious. And with this mood of being jealous and furious, he gets behind the piece that Mozart is about to play. And as he looks at the piece, we hear the dialogue in the movie between Salieri and himself. And the dialogue goes like this. On the page, it looked like nothing. Simple, almost comical, like a rusty squeeze box. Then, suddenly high above it, an oboe. A single note hanging there unwavering until a clarinet took it over and sweetened it into a phrase of such delight. This was not music by a performing monkey. This was a sound I'd never heard, filled with such longing, such unfulfillable longing. It seemed to me that I was hearing the voice of God. Now, I know that I didn't tell you anything new today. I didn't tell you this, but I don't do new. I do renew. What I've been trying to do is tell you a few words from the book Touching the Holy on perspective, on passion, and again on prayer. These words are not new words, but they're reminders to be faithful to God. I know that when we're down, we can get psychology books and read psychology and know psychology, and it doesn't seem to help us. We still seem depressed. We still seem sad and anxious. I also know that at times when we feel spiritually lost, we will go to friends and we'll talk to them, and it doesn't seem to help. We may go also to prayer and sit there in chapel and look at God in prayer. And in that prayer, we may ask for guidance and ask for the darkness to lift. And in that darkness, we sit there, and the darkness seems to remain. The reality that we have to face is that if we are spiritual people, if we are people filled with faith, we're still going to be depressed at times. We're still going to be stressed out at times. We're still going to be anxious at times. People who are religious, people who are people of faith, spiritual individuals do not feel any less pain than other people. As a matter of fact, people of faith often feel the pain more keenly because they're concerned about others they truly love. My point is, though, that when you experience this darkness, if you are faithful in attempting to remain with a sense of perspective, if you are faithful in your prayer life, that darkness will not only be a sense of mystery, a sense of pain, but that darkness also will eventually become clear as the will of God. As a matter of fact, that darkness will eventually even become the presence of God. This isn't easy, but it's simple. And simplicity is at the core of a prayerful life.
Dr. Robert Wicks is Professor and Director of Program Development for the graduate programs in Pastoral Counseling at Loyola College in Maryland. In his clinical practice, Dr. Wicks focuses on working with persons in full-time ministry. A frequent lecturer around the world, he has published over 30 books on psychology and spirituality.
It's good to be with you again. In the last segment, we spoke about my book, Touching the Holy, Ordinariness, Self-Esteem, and Friendship. And we reflected on perspective and passion. Now I would like to look briefly at three other important spiritual and psychological words. And those words are ordinariness, friendship, and a few brief words on reflection or prayer. Now, first, ordinariness. I have an unusual kind of feeling about ordinariness. I believe true ordinariness is actually tangible holiness. A number of years ago, a colleague of mine at General Theological Seminary in New York City was hosting Desmond Tutu. And halfway through Desmond Tutu's presentation, one of the seminarians in the audience nudged the dean and said to him, "Desmond Tutu is a holy person." And you never make a statement like that to a theological dean and expect to get away with it. So the dean said to him, "How do you know that Desmond Tutu is a holy person?" And the seminarian didn't even blink. He looked back at him and said, "I know that Desmond Tutu is holy because when I'm with him, I feel holy." Now the question I have for you is that the way people feel when they're with you? Are you so ordinary and so undefensive that they can feel the presence of God in themselves? I think when we think of holiness, we often think of great things. But holiness is manifested in ordinariness when we are simply ourselves. Not far from here, there's a graveyard. And in this graveyard, there's a stone, a little stone next to a very big stone. This big stone is of somebody who was in many wars. And it lists all the battles he was in and the great things he did. And next to it is a little stone of a woman who died when she was 22. And on the stone is a scroll that says, "From your loving husband." And it only has one line on it. It says on it, "Wherever she went, she brought flowers." When I saw that stone, my thought was, this is true holiness. And it made me ask myself, what are really the flowers that I have to bring? What is my sense of ordinariness? While ordinariness is simple, it's not easy. The great poet E.E. Cummings said a long time ago that really, to be nothing but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle you can fight and never stop fighting. To fight this battle is a great challenge of the spiritual life. I think what helps us to be ordinary is knowing one of the great spiritual challenges in life. If you look at scriptures, anybody's scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Upanishads, the Hebrew Bible, or the Christian New Testament, you will see one of the great spiritual commands is to love. Isn't that the source of James's controversial epistle? Put up or shut up. Don't talk about love, do it. And I believe that it is a great commandment and a great spiritual challenge to give love. But by the same token, I don't believe that giving love, while it is important, is the greatest challenge of the spiritual life. I believe that the greatest challenge of the spiritual life is not to give love, but to receive love. Then we can meet the challenge to be ordinary. John the 23rd said many years ago, "Whoever has a heart full of love always has something to share." It's also cross-cultural. The Igbo of Nigeria have a saying, "It is the heart that gives, the fingers just let go." I think what happens is when we feel a sense of love, we can give with a sense of mitzvah. And by that I mean giving and expecting nothing in return. So ordinariness is a way to touch the holy. But you can't be ordinary unless you feel loved. Another important word is friendship. Friendship. Henry Nouwen, in his wonderful book, Making All Things New, noted, "We can take a lot of physical and even mental pain when we truly know that it makes us a part of the life we live together in the world. But when we feel cut off from the human family, we quickly lose heart," unquote. Now, I know friendship isn't easy. There's a saying from India that when once you have been bitten by a snake, you become cautious even of a rope. But I also have seen how important friendship is. An anonymous author once said, "A friend knows the song in your heart and can sing it back to you when you've forgotten how it goes." Friendship is essential. But the question you may ask yourself is, what kind of friends do I need? I would like to suggest to you today 4 types of friends. First, the prophet. The prophet. Now, no one likes prophets. Henry Thoreau once said, "If you see someone coming to do good for you, run for your life." The prophet asks us the question, to what voices are we responding to in life? What voices are guiding us? The prophet begins and asks us to really come to the point where we can begin to question, what are our ethics? Who is guiding us in the way we live our lives? The prophet. The second type of friend we need is the cheerleader. If we only have prophets, we're going to burn out. If we only have cheerleaders, we'll be narcissistic. We need balance. We need both. To give you an example, it took 2 years to find a chancellor of a particular state educational system. And he was only on the job for a year and he quit. And they asked him, they said, was it something major that we just didn't know about? And he said, no, the gnats finally got to me. I think if you get some of the calls that I get at home or at work, you would say the same thing. I think to myself, where do you get the time to be such a pain in the neck? The reality is people center on the negative in the world, and they're often pressures to us. We need sympathetic people in our life that are cheerleaders, that support us. So much so that when we call and we tell them that we've made a mistake, they tell us, it's the cutest mistake I've ever heard in my whole life. So much so that when we tell them, we call them and say, you're not going to believe what he said to me today. The person says back to us, I don't believe it. And when we tell them that in fact, that this person really said all these things, they say, you're totally right. He's totally wrong. So much so that we start to feel a little anxious and we think, well, I might have had some minuscule part to play in it. And the person says, oh no, you're totally right. As a matter of fact, I'm praying for his early happy death, you know. We need people like that so we can recognize what W.S. Gilbert said a long time ago. You have no idea what a poor opinion I have of myself and how little I deserve it. We need cheerleaders to support us. The third type of friend is the harasser. We need harassers in life because on the way to taking God seriously, we often make the mistake of taking ourselves too serious instead. A number of years ago, I was teaching an evil group of people. We call them undergraduate students. And it was the first class of the semester. And I went into the classroom, and the class went terrible instantly. This wasn't slow death, it was instant. And when I get anxious, I speed up. So at the end of the 45 minutes, I had blown the whole semester's notes out the window. And I got out in the hallway and I was depressed. And there was a colleague at the end of the hall, a psychologist, and as soon as he saw me, he was at my side in an instant because they love to treat their own. And his eyes got glazy and his voice got low and he said, you seem depressed. And I said, this sounds serious. Is this an official interview? He said, it is. I said, is it going to cost me? He said, no, the first one is professional courtesy, and then the clock starts running. He said, why are you depressed? I said, well, I was in there and I gave a talk and it was like a rock in water. He said, but why are you depressed? I said, Rick, they put their watches to their ears to see if the hum was still there. He said, but why are you depressed? I said, well, they did something that I didn't think was anatomically possible. He said, well, what did they do? I said, they yawned in unison. I'd never seen that before. He said, but why are you depressed? I said, now I'm not only depressed, I'm furious. I'm furious. As a matter of fact, they think I'll hurt you. I said, why shouldn't I be depressed? He said, well, quite simply because 5 seconds after you left the room, they forgot what your name was. I said, couldn't we do this treatment a little easier? What he was saying is that I was guilty of the sin, are you still allowed to say that word? The sin of negative grandiosity. Negative grandiosity. I think on the way to taking God seriously, the temptation is so easy to take ourselves seriously. So what do we have in terms of friendship? We have friendship in terms of somebody who really stands by us prophetically. We have also the cheerleader. Then we have the harasser that helps us not to take ourselves seriously. Then there's the fourth friend, and it's really a group of spiritual friends. It includes, first and foremost, the spiritual director. Now, most of us know what a spiritual director is, but let me just tell you a couple of biases I have about a spiritual director. A spiritual director is the person that we see regularly. Could be every 6 weeks, every 2 months, every 3 months, but on a regular basis. And for what purpose? This is very important. About our relationship with God, not our relationship with the director. Now, of course, our relationship with the director is important, but first and foremost, it is the relationship with God. The second element of this relationship with the spiritual director is that the person who's directing us must have the charism, the gift of direction. This is given by God. It's not given by the human person. So spiritual directors can be almost anyone if they've been given that charism. And we know they have that charism because people are drawn to this individual. Now, it's important to feed this charism. So if people are drawn to you, you should consider more theology. You should consider an institute for spiritual direction. You should consider the education. But it's important that, in fact, you have this charism. The second kind of spiritual friend in this category is the spiritual companion, as we say in Gaelic, the anam cara, the soul friend. Now, a tip on this. One of the best ways to know a good spiritual companion is they call us to be all that we can be without embarrassing us that we are where we are. Isn't that wonderful? They're the kind of person that we may not use religious talk with. We may not use the God word. But when we leave this person, we feel more integrated. We feel more in touch with what's important in life. We realize the value of living. So we have the spiritual director, the spiritual companion. Now, the third spiritual friend is a rare bird. I'm going to warn you. It's the contemporary Abba or Amma of the desert. It's the Russian starets, the Zen Rashi, the Hasidic rabbi, the Christian mystic, the Taoist sage. It is the wise, holy person in this world. And there are some that are there in the world as resources for us. If we're Christian, we're looking for somebody, a Christian mystic who can help us. Now, there are some cautions about this person. First of all, don't go to this person if you really don't need this person. In many cases, when we have a problem in life, all we need to do is sit down and think about it. If we take out the quiet time, we've got the intelligence. We can take it to prayer. Many people don't take enough things to prayer. Prayer can help us. There are many times people have made vocational decisions, whether it's to leave the priesthood, whether it's to enter religious life, whether it's to haven't taken it to prayer. I know it sounds unusual, but they haven't. Praying over it is essential. You could take it to a spiritual director. That person can help you. You can talk over with your friends. Your friends will be honest with you. You can say, look, I've really got this problem. Let me lay it out for you. What do you think? You can go to a counselor maybe for a few sessions. Treat yourself to a few sessions of counseling if you need it. You might need that. If you've tried all of these things, though, maybe you are at a special turning point in time and you need to see this spiritual guide. Now, that's number one. You should have tried everything else. Number two, you should be serious. If you're not serious, don't bother this person. Don't bother this person. Be very serious. Number three, you should recognize that, in fact, what you hear, you may not fully understand, or you may not like it. Don't ask the question if you're not willing to hear answers that you don't like. Remember the person who came to Jesus and said, what do I do? Well, what should I do to gain eternal life? And he said, well, give to the church, be good to your neighbor, If I were that guy, I would have left. He was ahead of the game. But no, he kept pushing and said, what else can I do? Jesus said, sell all and follow me. And then he left in sadness. So be ready for the answer if you're going to ask the question. Finally, this is a little trickier. There's a Russian proverb that goes, the hammer shatters glass but forges steel. Interesting, isn't it? Shatters glass but forges steel. Isn't that interesting? What that proverb means is that a person who's right at one point may not be right at another point. So that you may have had a spiritual Abba in your life, a wise and holy person to help you during a change in your life. But that person in your 20s may not be right for you when you're in your 30s or 40s. So, of these spiritual friends, the spiritual director, the spiritual companion, the Anamkara, the Abba, the final one is not a person, but it's still a spiritual friend. It's a place or a book. There are places in our life that we've been, that we've experienced God's grace. It's been a wonderful experience. For me, I can think of 3 places right off the bat. First, I can think of a place in Ireland, on the west coast of Ireland. Mullaghmore, the name of the place is. Wonderful place, right on the water. Felt the presence of God. Another is in Newfoundland. I was guiding a priest retreat in Newfoundland, on the west coast, up in Pasadena on this lake, and it was a wonderful experience. Third is very different from the first 2. It's a hospital chapel in New York City. Felt the sense of God. Now, when I become depressed and upset and my prayer is hard, what I do is I use imagery. We don't use imagery enough in the spiritual life. I think we need to use imagery. So I image myself back in that place of wonder, in that place of God, and it helps me pray. Also, books. Spiritual books can help us, either scriptures or a favorite spiritual book. Now, when I'm very depressed, when I am depressed, I can't read. I can't think straight. So when I open up a book, I don't open up a new book. Forget that. I'm too depressed to read. I open a book that I've loved. And even then I can't read that book, but what can I do? I can look at what I've underlined, those few lines that touched me, and then read those words. I'll be honest with you, show how wild I get about this. I even touch the words kinesthetically and feel their presence. And this helps me gain perspective. Spiritual friends. Now, in addition to ordinariness and the spiritual friends, we need the core of the spiritual life, which is prayer, a sense of prayer. Now, you may say to me, well, people say a lot about prayer, but I must confess to you that I'm unsure exactly about what prayer is. What is prayer? Well, prayer is a funny kind of thing. And I once asked a whole group of priests at the end of a retreat in Alaska. I was guiding a retreat, a wonderful group of guys. And I said, what about prayer? What can you tell me about prayer? And one old fella said, well, let me tell you what prayer is. It was old Monsignor. He said, I once worked in this residential setting for Eskimo children. And one of them was by my door, and he knocked on the door and said, Father, can I come in and sit down? And I said, no, can't you see I'm busy? I'm at my desk. And he said, oh, no, I won't bother you. He said, no, I know your type. You'll bother me. And he said, no, I won't. He said, well, all right, come in and sit down and keep quiet. He said, and after a few minutes, I started to feel a little guilty. I said to him, I can't imagine why. He said, and I said to the boy, I said, you want something to read? And he said, no. I said, you sure? No. And he sat there in silence and solitude with this Monsignor for about, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and he'd get up and said, good night, Father, and he went off. And he did that, he said, for about 5 or 6 months. And finally, I realized that what he wanted was simply to be present to me and have me present to him. That was it. And he said, and that's what I do when I'm with Jesus. I'm there in prayer simply with God, and God is simply there with me. This sense of presence is important. Now, we may say We may say, in fact, how can we be present to God? Well, I think it's simply the intention, the time, and a willingness to simply let go. Now, I say simply let go because what I'm pointing to is something very difficult. A number of years ago, I was treating a patient who was going through what we call the working through phase of psychotherapy. And what the working through phase is something very important. People often think in psychotherapy, understanding cures you. That's nonsense. If an alcoholic comes into me and I give him understanding at the end of the treatment, I just have an enlightened alcoholic. No change, okay? It's insight. It's where the head and the heart come together, and it's a working through phase. And that's fascinating. And when I was with this patient, she was doing wonderfully with me. Wonderful. And then she tried to apply the techniques outside the room, and she fell right on her face. Fell right in her face. And I said to her, but I don't understand. In here, you're doing fine. Out there, you don't seem to be doing well. Why? And she said, you don't get it, do you? I said, no, I don't. She said, in here, it's like the light is on. I trust you. I feel at peace. Out there, it's darkness, and I'm frightened that if I just let go, I'll fall into the darkness. And just at that moment, I remembered when I was in the military service, I remembered something that I had forgotten. As a matter of fact, for some reason, I had forgotten about the whole 3 years I was in the military service. I don't know why. But it was this thing called the confidence course. And I remember seeing it and standing in front of it and looking at it and thinking, no way am I going to do this. So there was a fellow standing next to me. He was wearing a round hat. He looked like a Boy Scout. And I said to him, I don't think I'm going to do this. And he said to me, what? I said, look, I don't want to hold up the rest of the fellas. Why don't I go around, set up some tables and beverages for the boys, you know? At that point, he whispered something in my ear. Now, given the nature of this get-together, I'm not going to tell you exactly what he said. But to give you a sense of it, my response was, is what you just suggested anatomically possible? And he said, well, I will show you if you don't do the course. And I said, you know, I'm feeling new motivation well enough in me. And I did this course. I ran it, and you climb things, and finally I get to the middle of the course, and I see this little obstacle. It's a ditch with a little A-frame over it and a rope. And I see the Boy Scout kind of guy. He runs, grabs a rope, swings over, no problem. And I think I've misjudged these Marines. This is an easy obstacle. This is a confidence builder. But then, being even a great observer back then, I noticed something fascinating. The fellas in front of me, who were approximately 14'6", were swinging over and swinging back. Or they'd swing over, and at the last minute, the rope would hit them, and they'd either fall in the ditch, or they'd have to grab for it to save themselves. I thought, what's wrong here? And finally, I recognized what was wrong. There was only one way that you could do this obstacle. You had to run as fast as you could, like we do in life, grab the rope, swing over, and in midair, let go. Prayer sounds wonderful to us. But when we're in silence and solitude, when we sit there waiting to greet God, who certainly will greet us in prayer, something unusual happens. In the silence and solitude, we clear out our consciousness, and the preconscious rises, bringing with it lies and deceit that have filled our lives. Avoidances, denials, and games that we've played. Now, if we stay with them and really believe that God loves us, they will melt and disappear, and we will be called to the kinds of behavior we need to be called to. My point, though, is that it takes faithfulness. It takes a willingness to chart an unusual course with yourself and God. Thomas Merton was once asked, how do you find God? What is a great way to pray? What is a path to God? He said it's like standing in front of a field of untrodden snow and looking for a path. Walk across the snow, and there's your path. It's the same in prayer. We need to talk less about it and do it more. So what have we suggested today? Nothing new, but again, an appreciation of ordinariness, a recognition that we really need friends in this journey. We need the prophet, we need the cheerleader, we need the harasser and the Abba, and we need a sense of prayer. Thank you. One of the greatest things we can share with each other is a sense of our own peace. I think the book Touching the Holy gives us a chance to experience that peace. It's available from the Daughters of St. Paul bookstores, other religious bookstores, and directly from Ave Maria Press in Notre Dame, Indiana, 46556, or by calling 1-800-282-1865.